Emotiva XT2, big old tower speaker at a pretty good price for about $1,000 per pair, direct from Emotiva. This pair was loaned to me to review. I was not paid or anything like that. So let's start off with some specs real fast. The high frequency driver is a ribbon tweeter. It's approximately 25 millimeters by 32 millimeters. The mid-range is a 5¼ inch woven cone diaphragm, and the low frequency driver, 3 of them, are each 6-inch woven cone diaphragms as well. Power handling is stated at 250 watts continuous. Recommended amplifier power is 100 watts or greater. Nominal impedance is 4 ohm. Now in my listening session, I got a pretty large open space room. I'll say this, just if I can summarize this in a couple sentences: nonlinear sound, so not neutral sound, but really nice bass extension. And the other key feature here is that this speaker is most likely going to be purchased by people who are looking for home theater speakers on a relative budget. And when you're using home theater equipment, you almost always have equalization. These speakers respond quite well to equalization. So that really is their saving grace in terms of fidelity. They also have low distortion and low compression. In my listening sessions, what I found was that the top end was just too bright for me. Now that's with the speaker pointed directly at you, and different manufacturers have different design implementations. So typically I start off with the speaker pointed directly at me, and then I start turning it away from me more and more until I kind of get a good idea of what the speaker is going to do in different rooms. With this speaker pointed directly at you, too much top end, with it towed out, facing more out into the room at about 30 degrees off axis, as this graphic shows. The overall high frequency response is more neutral throughout, but you're still left with the non-neutrality of the mid-range area. So between about 200 to about 500 hertz, there's a scoop in the mid-range that makes the speaker sound relatively hollow. Male and female vocals just don't quite have the weight that you expect. And then on the top end and the upper mid-range, lower treble region, there's some discontinuity there where the speaker will maybe sound a little bit dull, maybe a lack of attack or dynamicism through that particular area. Now, this graphic I'm showing you gives you an overall impression of what the speaker's doing without being in a room. If I look at this graphic, the one thing I like to pay attention to here is the lower directivity index data down here, especially the early reflections, this dashed blue line. Now, the more linear this line is, which is kind of redundant, the better off the speaker will behave when you need to apply equalization. Now, the way to think about this really quickly is, if you have a sound that is coming directly at you and it's fine, but the sound that's hitting the wall and being reflected back is way different than the sound that's directly at you, in the seat, you get a combination of those two. You cannot say, I just want to EQ the sound that's reflected so I can get good sound and good sound coming together, okay? Because of that, you can't just simply fix a speaker with EQ blindly. You have to understand what's going on with the speaker itself. And when you have this line down here, if it behaves very non-linearly, if you have a big dip through here and it comes back up, that's a sign that you're going to have more trouble equalizing its response. And while this isn't perfectly linear, it's within enough of a window that I think that for its price, it's worth considering purchasing for home theater use, where you can use EQ to tame some of this non-linearity, like this bump right here, this dip through the mid-range. This is what I was talking about earlier. And then this dip right here, and this dip right here, and this peak on axis. If I do turn the speaker off axis at 30 degrees, the top end kind of flattens out. So that's a little bit better. But I want to show you an example of what you can do with this speaker if you use equalization. So we start with this natural frequency response. Sensitivity 90 decibels, F3 63 hertz, F10 34 hertz. Good bass extension in the room. Let's say we want to come in and smooth this out. Can we do that? Well, the directivity that we just saw indicates that, yeah, within reason, you can smooth that out. So how will we do that? Well, there are a couple different ways. If you had a perfect scenario, you would take the data that I'm providing. We would assume that the QC is perfect and all speakers go out that factory the same way. And then we would use something like a mini DSP, and we would take this whole region of the frequency response, and we would apply this equalization here. And these are all the bands. So 151.5 hertz, bring it down 3 decibels with a Q of 2.5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You might not have a mini DSP. With the WIM products, you can do something very similar to this. I can't remember. I want to say they tap out at 10 bands. I'm using all 10 bands here. The Ever Solo products have equalization as well, which you can access via the app. So that's another option. And then again, if you want to go back to maybe room correction, it's a stab in the dark, but you can give it a shot. If you take these bands of EQ, then you go from this black to this blue, which I isolated here. And you can see that I've really smoothed out the on-axis frequency response. So here's my suggestion. If you're looking at buying these speakers and you're already thinking, yeah, I really want them, go ahead and buy them. Use my EQ suggestions if you can, with your WIM, with your whatever you have. If you have the ability to go in and set manual EQ corrections, do this. In terms of compression and distortion, these speakers get plenty loud. In my listening, I cranked these up to about 95 decibels at about 10 feet away. They were fine. They didn't really have an issue at all with that. And this is why I say that at high output levels, for me, I had no problems, no complaints about graininess or any kind of compression sounds or any sort of distorted artifacts. None of that. These things play plenty loud. And unless you have a home theater the size of a basketball court, you shouldn't run into any issues. That is another reason that these are good options for home theater. Now, are they good options for hi-fi listening without equalization? No. I definitely would say no. But for home theater with equalization, for sure, especially at their price. If we want to get an idea of what the speaker is going to sound like in room without equalization, we can look at this estimated in-room response, and then I can give you a line kind of indicating the overall contour of the speaker for a typical room. Now, remember, this is just an approximation. Your room is going to vary, especially in the lower bass region below around 400 or 500 hertz, because that's when the room dimensions really take over, okay? But above that, pretty good predictors. Burst decay looks pretty good for the most part, but we do see some lingering resonance around 700 hertz or so. Horizontal contour plot. Now, this gives us an idea of what the envelopment, what the soundstage radiation, what the width is going to be like. And for this speaker, it was pretty much right where I want it to be at about plus or minus 60 degrees, as we can see here. Now let's talk about vertical orientation. Like, where are you going to put your ears relative to the speaker? They better be at that tweeter axis, because if not, you're going to have a very different sound. You're going to have holes in the response in the upper mid-range and the lower treble region. Now, 15 degrees at 10 feet, I don't know what the math is on that, but that's some decent wiggle room. Now, if you're at 15 degrees and you're trying to sit near field, well, first of all, you shouldn't be buying a tower speaker with multiple drivers and trying to sit this far from them. You can just use headphones, just set some headphones on your desk and play them through that. But for the most part, this is kind of what I expected, but it still is narrow. So if your idea of listening to music or playing home theater, especially if you have multiple rows of seating, you really need to be careful to make sure that those multiple rows are going to be able to hear a similar sound from those seating positions. For example, you got a back row. If it's 2 feet higher than the front row, you're going to have to kind of strike that balance between where you put that tweeter level relative to each seat's listening position. Short-term compression does show some issues with the tweeter in the high frequency area. Now, the reason that this speaker is so nonlinear and needs a lot of help with EQ, resonances. We see a lot of resonances in the impedance plot. Now I want to do a comparison between the Emotiva XT2, the ELAC DF63, and the Polk R500. These are all in the same ballpark of price. Right now, the Emotiva is at $999. The ELAC, I believe, is at about $12 or $13, and the Polk R500 is around $12 or $1300 for the pair as well. Starting off with the spinorama data, here is the Emotiva again. And then we go to the ELAC. So the ELAC overall response seems to be maybe a little bit more linear, with just kind of like a downward slope. If we go back here, we can see that, yeah, the Emotiva is definitely more rocky, but it doesn't mean that the ELAC is perfect. Now let's roll down to the Polk R500. Polk R500 on axis, really good. Really, really good linearity. Now, but notice all these speakers kind of have some issues in the mid-bass region. Most likely, not a guarantee, but most likely this is going to be due to a modal issue due to the cabinet height. So now we're talking about the on-axis response. Again, here's the Emotiva F3 at 63 hertz, F10 at 34 hertz, pretty nonlinear. If we look at the ELAC, we see more linear, but a downward trending response overall. F3 is at 71 Hertz. F10 is at 29 Hertz. Now, the way that this roll-off is shaped indicates to me that it might work better when it's placed a little bit closer to a wall. And now if we go to the Polk R500, now this one does not roll off at the same rate as the ELAC. So you notice down here on the ELAC, and then on the Polk, boom, we got a little bit of a bump there. So the Polk's going to need more room than the ELAC. The Polk F3 is at 51 Hertz. F10 is at 33 Hertz. So good bass extension on this one as well. And again, we see much better linearity on axis. Let's talk about radiation. This is the Emotiva at around plus or minus 60 degrees all the way up to the mid-range. And then if we look at the ELAC, kind of the same thing, you know. And then if we look at the Polk, again, kind of the same thing. But the thing about the Polk that really stands out is how narrow it becomes in the higher frequency, meaning that the sound isn't really broad in the higher frequencies. It's really narrow, really fast. So let me go back. This is the ELAC. See how it stays pretty stable in the higher frequency? And then if we go look at the Emotiva, it narrows, but it's not quite as severe as the Polk. Now, the Polk's ring radiator tweeter narrows up pretty intensely. That means that you're going to have you're going to have less sense of space from the Polk than you would the other two speakers. Estimated in-room response of the Emotiva, you already saw this. And then the ELAC. So the ELAC, some similar traits. You know, you got a little bit of a dip in the upper mid-range, a little bit of a dip in the treble region. Remember where the Emotiva was kind of dipped through this region? Well, the ELAC now is kind of bumped up through here. So they're definitely going to sound different. How did these bumps and dips and all that stuff wind up sounding in your room? Well, honestly, it really depends, right? So if I drew this line and I started him up here, more in line with the mid-range area, and then I drew it tilting down, I would say, oh yeah, you're definitely going to notice a whole lot of laid back sound in the ELAC. But if you compare it to the Polk, then your ears are probably going to tune into the upper mid-range region right here, because this is the upper mid-range. And then you look at the lower mid-range area, or just the mid-range area, compared to the ELAC again, where the ELAC has more mid-range. So it's going to sound more meaty, more full, potentially boxy, just depending on how you want to define these things. So that's how I'm looking at it in this comparison. But, you know, wake me up tomorrow and I might give you a different version of this comparison. Either way, you're going to notice a difference, but how you describe that difference, it can change. And then we've got the Polk again. So the Polk, linear through the mid-range, upper mid-range, more of a warm sound overall. But then the high frequency, look how it just rolls off really quickly in the room. The Polk would probably make more sense for a room that's very, very reverberant, and you want less energy being sent out to the sidewall, at least in the higher frequency. Compression for the Emotiva, and then the ELAC, and then the Polk. So the Polk doesn't have the same gusto in terms of compression dynamic range as the other two. And then if we look at multi-tone distortion of the Emotiva versus the ELAC, and then versus the Polk. So the Polk can't get as loud without distortion as the Emotiva and the ELAC. And then if you look at the ELAC versus the Emotiva, you can see that the Emotiva has lower mid-range distortion. Ultimately, between these three speakers, they're all good in their own right. Now, they need different work in different areas, and they're not necessarily directly comparable in terms of, hey, they're all linear. It's more about this one's linear, but doesn't get as loud. So that would be like the Polk, right? Or this one is very nonlinear, but has excellent distortion, and that would be the Emotiva. And then the ELAC is kind of in between. And that does it for this review. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, hit me up in the comment section below. And please, I do this every video, but I'm serious. The way that I run this whole thing and monetize this thing, and the reason that I don't do sponsorships or get paid to do reviews, is because of you all. The ad revenue sucks. The number of views that I get, relatively speaking to big channels, it sucks. The way that I generate income doing this is by you using my generic affiliate links. So the Amazon links, or the Crutchfield links, or the Best Buy, or the Audio Advice, or the Target, and they're all in my description section below. And really all you got to do is next time you want to buy something from any of those retailers, you just remember, hey, Aaron's got these links. Go click one of those links. It'll take you to a generic page because they're generic links, not a product link. And then you just buy whatever you want as long as cookies are enabled. And I get some commission from that. Or you can go to patreon.com/Aaron's Audio Corner and sign up there, become a member. You get behind the scenes information, early access to reviews, early access to data, and giveaways and things of that nature from time to time. I really appreciate it. And I'm just trying to go for transparency here about how I operate this channel and maybe let you all know, like, help a brother out if you can, if you don't mind. Again, I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a good one. Talk to you later. Take care.